Live. Now let's get my show on the road here.
Why is this not working? Let me try my phone.
Welcome to Evolution Hour. The clickety clacks and the old typewriters and analog clocks and gauges and crap that are coming from my ancient world as an old fart from the 20th century. And the website tortukan.wordpress.com, Doubles in Paradise. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Guest today, as is often the case because he can come or not, is Jackson Wheat. Say hi, Jackson Wheat.
Well, hello.
And I'll make a point of getting the patrons in due order. I don't know whether or not my chat overlay is clicking on or not. I haven't seen any comments on that. If I start seeing anything pop up, I'll put my name in there. Hi, all. Whether or not if anybody responds. So I think yeah, we got chat. Yay! Yes, Riley, Lisa for Truth, Brian Stevens. We got some people watching the show. Welcome to the show, and I can actually see your chat, so we can respond. And by the way, Jackson, you can take a look and see what's going on because I got it on the main feed as well. That if anybody puts up a comment that we missed, or where they go, wait a minute, we should respond to that or deal with that. We can do so. Who knows? Standing for Truth might pop up. Otangelo, Kenny, the obligatory creationist. He's been haunting some of these sites. Who knows? Might come and grace our things. Well, as those of you who have been watching the show since like forever are painfully aware, the primary core issue, we're going through a source analysis of replacing Darwin. Nathaniel Jeanson's tome, where he thinks to replace Darwin, came out in 2017. From a source methods point of view, it gets out of the gate as a failure because there's no index and no reference bibliography, which means you can't easily tell what he's citing in the notes right off the bat. You should always be suspicious of a work that doesn't have a coherent reference bibliography and indexing system so that you can find information in it. Otherwise, they pull fast ones on there. So, as I did with Rupin Sanford's book, I'm also going through constructing a reference bibliography, finding out where everything is cited, following up on that, and sharing this stuff with you, hapless audience, who didn't realize what you were signing up for on this. Jeanson is still, still in chapter 6. I've been going through it a little slower than usual because, as I've been telling Jackson, I'm in the process of the great sorting, which is the rearrangement of the vast amounts of fire hazard papers that I have printed out and accumulated over the last decade and more that relates to the various subject matters. Elisa for Truth, how did he even get that published? Because I think he has a favorable group who publishes it. Let's see who the bloody publisher is. Master Books, that's a religious creationist publishing group. They do stuff on religious topics and various things from Henry Morris and types involved. So it's a religious publication group. And it's not a huge book. It's paltry, and the print space is not exactly colossally large. So it's, if you compressed it to the scale that Jackson and I have in our book, it would be a small pamphlet in comparison to what we did for the rocks were there. Anyway, let me stop and thank our patrons for the project. One of these days, I'm going to have a word processor thing on the laptop so I can put the file up or something. I'll work about that in due course, but I'm slow. Anyway, we've got our colleagues, Henro, Colton, Eric Raleigh, Suris, and Seshi. We have our researcher levels, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Neal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Paula Gia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, our assistant researchers, Doronku Totus Real and Christopher Johnson, our friend level Daniel, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Philopicus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams, and then our legacy patrons who were able to help at one point or another, and I will continue to thank you, Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew Dyer, Iwi, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nanyas, Agel, Sun, Skystone, Ugly Children, Truths, Everett, and Sewer. Every one of you has made a difference on this whole. So we're keeping at it with our projects. The Jackson and I have enough projects afoot to keep us both busy and out of trouble or in trouble, depending upon your point of view. that we will definitely do on things. We're all getting into the structuring phase for the chapters for the new book. That's part of the reason for the great sorting from my end, because I had piles, like think 4 stacks of printouts, each about 3 feet high, of just material on the creation science stuff. And that had piles of material relating to examples of creation is stupid. It turned out I had 5, count them, 5 packets on that damned Greenland aircraft Lost Squadron issue that kept on popping up over the years, and I would research it and find slightly different accounts of it each time. And so now I pulled all of that together, and all the material on radiometric dating, on population distributions in the past, and mythology, and all the stuff on the dinosaur in Job and Behemoth and Leviathan. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I didn't want to miss any of it because so much of it is so gobsmackingly, amazingly stupid that, and sometimes topics are popping up, and especially stupid things are a thing. If you just looked at the title of the text, you wouldn't realize where the stupid was, but all that was on my personal notes that I had taken for these. So I've been sorting, and triaging and stacking everything up, and now it's to the point of where I can at least see the coherence of where all the material is going. And we'll get all of that done. And I guarantee you, Rock's Volume 2 is not going to be smaller than Rock's Volume 1. It's going to be a dense material and the creationists continue to contribute to the little footnote sides on various stupid things that they keep on coming up. There's been so much material on the genetic area in relation to human evolution that's going to make that whole human evolution chapter, in addition to all the stuff on the paleontology. And by the way, I have like 4 stacks, each about 3 feet high, of material just on the human evolution thing, the evolution of language and cognitive systems, and the paleontology and the creationist comments. That too, I will be sorting out, so we'll be able to deploy what we need of that for the new book. So there we go. That's what RJ does in his spare time. So
Yes.
back to are replacing Darwin, and a heads up on what will be in the second half of the show, which is a bunch of creationists who were riffing off of the Caspian Sea and how there have been sea level changes and flooding episodes relating to glaciers that they, of course, think is all to do with the big slosh flood. And so I'll be getting to that in a moment. Anyway,
The sloosh.
The slush, yes. Well, if it was colder, that's when it's turning into an ice age. Then it goes into grapple. Giant pieces of grapple. That's Kent Hovian's theory. Monster space grapple is coming down. I'm not making this up.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, Jeanson is still skipping along in this chapter 6 about species definition. And he happened to have, it's all generic websites and stuff that he's done, encyclopedias online and things, which basically are just a catalog of how many species there are. And he's trying to insinuate his super fast speciation thing to try to figure out how many varieties there are and how fast you can do that, as if that's a surrogate. And I mentioned last time about his 12,000-year-old date that he snips in there that's about domestication of species, not the origination of species, that I think blatantly misrepresented the source material. But anyway, along the way, he had a sentence, and I'll be putting that in the description text. One textbook gives at least 6 different definitions for species. I ignored this ambiguity and acted as if species were a uniform term. Okay. Other than him referencing the 2017 edition of Douglas, of Douglas Futuyma's book, which I didn't have available. Fortunately, I had his 2005 book available, and also it was referenced 2013 version. The 2017 one he co-authored with a more recent one to compare what was going on, to get some things on. And so what I suspect was in that 2013 version was what was in the 2005 one, which just listed off some various definitions of species. And he puts up Ernst Mayr's 1942 biological species concept. Species are groups of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups. And I'll be putting all of this information, by the way.
Wonder what organisms that definition can't possibly apply to.
Possibly fit, exactly. And then there was Wiley's 1978 evolutionary species concept, which says it's a single lineage, an ancestor-descendant sequence of populations or organisms that maintains an identity separate from other such lineages and which has its own evolutionary tendencies and historical fate, which we might call a clade.
Yeah, I mean,
in modern terminology.
That one has a degree of sort of arbitrarity baked into it, which is kind of necessary because we're dealing with living populations.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And so it's fun to look at these. For one thing, Jeanson never thought to mention what these 6 definitions are, even in the notes. Remember, this is a guy that went on with long digressionary footnotes for no apparent reason in the text and would stick his creationist sources in the footnotes to hide them from public view. But he couldn't just enumerate what these 6 definitions were for the point of view of his readers, lest they become more informed on the subject, and did not have the 23rd edition of Futuyma to look at like I didn't. The next one that Futuyma brought up in 2005 was a multiple one, phylogenetic species concept. A phylogenetic species is an irreducible basal cluster of organisms that is diagnosably distinct from other such clusters, and within which there is a parental pattern of ancestry and descent. That's from Craycraft in 1989. Notice these are all very older definitions of species before the genetics revolution, before cladistics was really getting into full bore in the systematics and that in the 90s and all. And then anyway, the number 2 part was the species is the smallest monophyletic group of common ancestry. That was De Queiroz and Donahue from 1990. See, now we're starting to get into that cladistic thing. Bingo. So we now could see that as they're moving along, they're getting to be a dynamic between a morphological breeding notion of how shapes change, but also that they boink. And so the biological species is, do they boink naturally or not? And what happens when they do? And what's the boundaries of them? And then we get to the final one. There's the next one from 1995, the genealogical species concept. That's in here. Species are exclusive groups of organisms, where an exclusive group is one whose members are all more closely related to one another than to any organism outside the group. That was from Ballman Shaw, 1995. That still sounds suspiciously like a clade.
Yeah.
And then the recognition species concept. This goes back to Colin Patterson from 1985. Dun, dun, dun. The recognition species concept. The species is the most inclusive population of individual biparental organisms that share a common fertilization system. So oddly, he's not going from the cladistic point of view, but from, I think it's Colin Patterson. I'll have to really check. It sounds like him. That we're talking biological pointing. Lisa for Truth says, why do creationists still use that question? Are they that dumb? If they came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Because they're that dumb. They're that. You'll find that primarily in the grassroots creationists. You don't find that in Answers in Genesis. You don't find that at ICR. You don't find that at CMI, because they know better. That's an obsolete term. That's an obsolete concept. It's just stupid. And have even written that it's stupid, don't use it. But the bulk of creationists that you encounter on social media are terribly ill-informed. These are not people who have kept up with their Answers in Genesis research journal stuff. No. They've maybe read a book or seen a posting somewhere or heard a trope at church, and they're simply troping all of that and have never bothered to check to see whether or not it was a valid idea to begin with, let alone what their own side has to say about it, which is therefore anybody who puts that statement up is, I'll put that up so everyone can see the guilty party. Anybody that puts that up is instantly demonstrating that they don't keep up with modern creationism, because nobody who is aware of that would have made such a statement to begin with. So that's an instantaneous diagnostic for superficial creationists. And the same thing if there's variance on it. Why are there still apes? Why are there monkeys in the zoo? Blah, blah, blah. In fact, Dapper Dino was just interviewing...
Goo to the zoo to you.
Yeah, from goo to the zoo to you, through the zoo to you. Yeah. Dapper Dino was just doing an interview with an ex-creationist, Cameron, who listened to material of exactly that type that was circulating in his very conservative religious institution. And he would be using that argument in apologetics when he was on the road to becoming a preacher that he eventually gave up on when he discovered reality. So that shows that that trope is knocking around all over the place. Brian Stevens says, yes, they are that dumb, blinded by the... Well, let me be charitable here, Brian, is that I don't attribute they're stupid to the book they're reading. That's the veneer that they're repeating. The problem is a core one, and this is the whole concept of that bloody Tortugan concept, which I explain and make use of in my various writings. And you can find out the lectures and stuff posted on it and that at my website. Another reason for going to the website. The idea that creationists are just a subset of people whose minds have an innate capacity to easily rely on secondary sources, to not think about things they don't want to think about, to not fact check material. Their brain goes into a fog. And if you have that kind of mindset, you can find it in other areas, anti-vaxxers, you can find it in Marxist ideologues, you can find it in a whole bunch of different belief systems, often intersecting in various demographic ways that you find. Creationists spill over into all sorts of areas, some of them into the geocentric flat earth zone, some of them into cryptozoology, some of them into super civilizations in the past, and then into prophecy cultures, and then Donald Trump and QAnon. There's a whole bunch of little tendrils that connect up in various ways. And if you view it entirely top down in terms of the content, the veneer, that can help diagnose clades of belief systems, but it doesn't explain why they can believe the stupid thing to begin with. And as soon as you start poking around underneath the hood, when you start looking at it from a source methods direction, when you're looking at that "why are there monkeys" trope, that one from a source methods direction is an instantaneous diagnostic. That somebody could not know anything about monkeys, not know anything about hominids, not know anything about humans, not know anything about speciation, not know anything about the chronology of things, not know anything about what evolutionary systems have to say, thinking has to say about lineages and all the rest. There's a lot of not knows in there. There's a lack of curiosity, a lack of rigor, instantly indicated by that. And the fact that they map onto a belief system that is blatantly not true makes it easy to diagnose. But here's where the other shoe drops. What if somebody has that kind of a mind, but they map onto things that are true? They sound perfectly plausible because they're saying things you can say are true, but their method is in fact problematic. And that's when you discover things, you know, a brilliant Tortugan mind like Noam Chomsky, who is, nobody can accuse him of being stupid. But nevertheless, at critical junctures, he slides into secondary source addiction and not following through on the logic of his position and all the rest. Brian Stevens says, lack of ability to properly understand scale seems to be a commonality. I think it's like physiological. You are hitting on a really relevant pattern here. I call it the map of time problem when it relates to creationism. That people have, creationists literally can't conceptualize deep time. They literally can't conceptualize transitional forms. They can't conceptualize speciation, bringing us back to the topic of the day with Jeanson and Futuyma and speciation. And so there's Tortugan ruts, there's blind spots in their head that they can't get to certain places. And different people with different Tortugan ruts and different ideologies will have different blind spots. But that sense of this and this and this leads to this and that connects to that and that connects to that, the inability to relate individual instances to generic abstractions and generalities, or the use of generalities devoid of specific instances, all of those you see an awful lot in political discourse, and you see it in creationist apologetics, religious apologetics, There's an awful lot of environments where this medium, this brain eccentricity of tortuosinosity, that I call it, is manifesting. And it becomes glaringly obvious and measurable at the source level. Because when I'm measuring something, I'm getting numbers to it. So I don't have to guess that Jeanson is running at about one source per page average, that roughly a quarter of the material from technical literature that he bumps into, he's misrepresenting. It's actually slightly lower at the moment percentage because he's had so little technical literature that he cited. Roop and Sanford had more technical literature. They were just Roop was a vacuum of technical citations in that book. And it was much denser. I think about 3 times as many sources in that, but still misrepresenting them. In fact, because they were dealing with technical literature, they were running at about the 50% level of misrepresentation. And I'm afraid you can't do a very good argument when you're misrepresenting any sources, let alone half of them.
Yeah.
And so the interesting issue that's going to be topics for subsequent work is, what is the neurobiology of this phenomenon? What's happening in the brain when people believe things that aren't true? How does that differ from people who believe things that are true? Does it, in some cases, not differ from how people believe things that are true? And there's not been a huge amount of people getting big picture on this. Michael Shermer wrote a book called The Believing Brain, which related to that. And it's the whole idea is, why do we have beliefs at all? How is it that we have these things? What's the interaction between this and dogmatic ideology, emotional connections that our amygdala has, specialized brain systems that are prone to do certain things in certain ways and can conflict with one another? That's all the subject matter that's going to be discussed in there. And believe you me, I find it enormously interesting. Hans Hansen says, for me, this thing with why is it still monkeys is like asking if this idea of parenthood is real. Why is it still parents? And then claims it as evidence for the stork theory. I put it in I call it the no cousins rule. And when anyone uses that argument, you can ask them, do you have like great grandparents, cousins? Did they all drop dead when you were born? No, that's not how genealogies and lineages work. Why would you think that's any different with speciation processes? And if this is another area that's a diagnostic for bad reasoning, is that whole species concept that Jeanson is bumping into in here, that grassroots creationists don't get the memo from the Jeansons of the world, who are trying to make a lot of speciation happen in a short period of time. And I think almost everybody that deals with creationists on a daily basis is bumping into them on YouTube and various other spots in Twitter. It's hard to go by a day without some nitwit in there telling you that there's no evidence for one species turning into another, when what they mean is, if they wanted to be rigorous, one Darwin kind turning into another, which is the actual creationist position. And that's way above the species level. And they don't realize that there's a connection on there. By the way, if you actually have something to say, Jackson, don't mind just jumping in and say, shut up, Tim, I have a point to make.
Speciation, or the species concept, attempting to reify it, is problematic. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. What we've got on here, I put in I'll be putting in a quote from the 2017 edition, or statement for the 2005 one, where it says, Jerry Coyne and Alan Orr, 2004, the authors of a recent comprehensive book on speciation, note that species can be defined in a way that, 1, enables us to classify organisms systematically, 2, corresponds to discrete groups of similar organisms, 3, helps us understand how discrete clusters of organisms arise in nature, 4, represents products of evolutionary history, and or 5, applies to the largest possible variety of organisms. It turns out that no 2 of these possible goals always coincide, and as pointed or point out, it's unlikely that any one species concept will serve most of these purposes. Now, by the time we get down to Futuyma 2017, times have changed. We are
Yeah.
now in a paleogenomic era, and we are now in a cladistic-driven era, where now essentially systematics is what are the boundaries for biological species concept? How much of it is sympatric versus allopatric? And what are the sexual selection issues that are going on and the gene flow matters? So in some respects, this debate has all of those other definitions of species are all submerged in the how does it mate and what's a clade, what's a natural clade, so that all definitions of species will relate to its position in a phylogenetic relationship to its cousins and ancestors. And that any
Yes.
model that tries to ignore that is not going to get anywhere. It's going to be in an absolute mess. And that's why when you look at the statement that Coyne and Orr put in from 2004, that in every respect, Jeanson is not on that field. He's not explaining much of anything. And the 2017 edition of Futuyma, that co-authored, stressed that the biological species concept model, quote, is the most widely used definition among biologists, unquote, and reviews some of its limitations, which shows that the evolutionary scientists are a long way ahead of where Jeanson was in that same year of 2017. All you have to do is to contrast those two works and realize that every scrap of information that Futuyma is going into, I'm sure, Jackson, you bumped into at least one textbook thing that discusses speciation issue, right?
Yeah, I've read my fair share bit of stuff about speciation, and textbooks tend to do that. They just give you an overview. They just give you a couple definitions, generally the biological species concept, and then maybe a couple of examples, and that's about it.
And the problem is Jeanson is not even clarifying yet what his own model is. The fact that he's hiding the ball so much in here, the fact that he's sneaking creationist sources in like maybe every other chapter in the footnotes, buried down that we wouldn't even notice where they were, is a surreptitiousness that I find very annoying. But if you have a model that, if you articulate it clearly, is preposterous, it's probably going to be difficult to put that right up front.
Yeah.
And just run with it, because if you start saying that you believe that all the species on Earth are descended from original kinds that were made all at the same time for all practical purposes within a single week 6,000 years ago, and that any differentiation from them seen in the fossil record has differentiated from the original created kinds in under 1,500 years, and then gets slammed by this amazingly peculiar sorting mechanism of the flood that never puts one bloody plesiosaur in the same deposit as a dolphin. And then that all the critters that were on board the ark, land animals, and we're not going to think about the fish, and we're not really going to think about insects, and we're not going to think about trilobites, and we're not really going to think about much of that.
There was a paper that came out today, which is about differences in hunting habits between two different species of deep sea diving dolphins.
In a way, then
that made me think about it.
The interesting thing is, would that be something that would be described as culture?
Maybe they.
Maybe.
The paper was referring to them specializing on like particular oceanic zones, like, or particular depths where they would hunt, and so maybe.
Yeah, but that all of that would then relate into the idea of how much of that is an instinctive behavior and how much of it is a cultural trait, and to what extent do they at all communicate such things by whatever little squeaks they make to one another, about which we have a very poor understanding of how much of that can be classified as language. So, hey, future researchers down there, there's more subjects for you to study.
Indeed.
I'd say one thing that the remote vehicle technology and the ability to get into habitats that way has exploded spectacularly within my lifetime. And so there is the capacity to investigate marine creatures at a level that simply was not possible in the Moby Dick era. so that anybody that was trying to make sense out of marine creatures basically had to watch them from the boat. And you're not going to tell much that way.
No.
Oh, Riley the Loser challenges all. The Earth is a bowl. Change my mind. It is shaped like a taco. I keep on telling everybody.
It's
Taco.
Velociraptor Earth. We live on Velociraptor Earth.
But don't forget the turtles. It's still resting on a bunch of turtles. The taco
Indeed.
Earth still is resting on turtles, and somewhere down there, I think there's a muskrat that got in, but we don't go into that much. That's heretical stuff. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, half an hour through the show. So all of that quotation material, alas, there won't be any direct links to the various material because these are textbook stuff, and those aren't necessarily available online, and I wasn't able to spot those. But on to part 2, which is the Caspian Sea and Friends. Our good old acquaintance Tim Clary and Davis Werner, his co-author on this point, had done some stuff on the South Caspian Basin supports a late Cenozoic flood boundary. This is hot material from a creationist point of view, because what they're saying, in effect, is they're putting the end of the flood deposits really recently. Whereas you have another camp of creationists that pretty much want to have the Cretaceous as the end of the flood. They don't, and so they're getting into a fist fight over how much of this is post-flood material. Some you can kind of cram in, hopefully, to a quickie set of catastrophes as the Earth settles down into its present configuration really fast. That's when ice ages are happening. That's when the mammoths are appearing. All of this stuff is all going on really fast, and the fossil forests are all baking into coal, and rock is forming and all that really, really fast.
Yes.
But the difficulty is the farther into the present you deal with it, you're now bumping into a new set of circumstances where you have genetic data from organisms that you can literally pull from what's in the things. You know, you're talking about stuff that's 10,000 years ago. Oh, you're in a whole ball of wax. So there's a 2019 paper by Tim Clary and Werner, which was then, it was actually touted in a New Year's Day 2021 email. ICR really wanted me to see this little puppy, so I made a point of looking into it. And so they thought that the big slosh was responsible for the Caspian Sea, and I'll put the link in that. The oddity is that they used the first-person I a lot in this short piece, which for a 2-author paper is unusual.
Yeah, that is a little unusual.
Suggesting one person wrote most of it and the other person does not proofread.
Yeah.
Which is different from what we were doing, where if one of us is using an I in our collaborative book, I'm sorry, we have to specify this is the position of the I that is doing it because there's 2 people involved. You know,
Indeed.
like
Yes.
Anyway, no surprise, this is largely a retread of earlier creationist material. There's only 4 non-Young Earth creationist technical works referenced, and I've got links for those that I'll be putting up, some of the ones that are available. One from a 1999 article that they listed as 1981.
That's a little bit of a difference.
Just a teeny bit, you know. And there was considerable amount of more recent work on the Caspian that, surprise, surprise, they didn't cite. So there is a paper from Jackson in 2002, not you, Jackson.
Who, me? Oh.
And Balderman 2020, that's really recent, which is after Clary's piece, that fills in the geology of the reason. And I also will call attention to the fact that in the Balderman paper, they are noting the volcanic ash layers that are found in the deposits, which is a neat thing to do in a big slosh flood. The spigot turns on and off really fast, I guess.
Yes.
And Taz Walker weighed in too in 2020. A massive flood impacted the Caspian Sea and Eurasia. Methods to use researching geological history. No, Taz, these are not the methods you should use to research geological history. Not a problem. Anyway, it's a lot of really wonderful technical literature, which will also become a happy little footnote in rocks too, because all this connects up to the very tumultuous environment that's taking place after the Ice Age, as glacial dams are breaking up and sea level changes are happening and all that. And this is also involving faunal interchanges as freshwater and saltwater critters, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that people are able to measure on this. And boy, it would be fun to see the creationists try to put together a model that is coherent even for their own, let alone each one coming up with their mutually conflicting model, that by being clear, you would realize how mutually conflicting it is. Like, oh, the flood boundary is at the KT. No, the flood boundary is in the Cenozoic. Years, days, months, how much after that is this supposed to be in that truncated time frame? Oh, it's a mess. Right. And I dare anybody in the creationist community, hearing this SFT, RAMAC, Mephi, whoever bumps into this, show me a paper where they go into detail, mapping out details of what they think the paleo environment was pre-flood, post-flood, during flood, or any spot on Earth. I am waiting to see such a thing. We get generic cartoons, we get vague stuff. Lisa brings up a very good question. Why do they insist on a young Earth when the Bible doesn't even say that? It's because of the lure of the anal retentive numbers geek. This thing started going in really 17th century, when it dawned on them that they had genealogy lists that go from Adam and Eve all the way down to post-Noah time, right? Mm-hmm. And so they'd say when they were begat, and when so-and-so was 500 years old, he had so-and-so married such and such and begat this and that. These might be thought of, some allegoricalists think that some of these might actually refer to different tribal family groups rather than individual people, and that's one way of rationalizing it. It might even be true in some cases. But the point is they come up with these little gate frames, and even though the varying versions of the texts are sufficiently vague that you get hundreds, if not thousands, of years of variation depending on how you play the numbers. One version is that you can add up who was begatting whom and who was in, and put the chronologies together, and you find charts. Kent Hovind and others over the years have put up little charts where they have the little things going down, and you can see the different members, Abraham and blah, 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 and how old they were when certain stuff's happened. And you can add those up and get a ballpark figure, and that's where Bishop Usher comes up with the 4000-ish BC date for the creation of the earth, and there's various ways of coming up with these things. Now, because the Bible is deemed to be the very word of God, no ifs, ands, or buts, do not doubt it in any way, shape, or form. There has been a blob of those in that period from the 17th century on who were defending that chronology. Now, some can squiggle around it in the day-age model as to how long a day is, and so you can have a gigantic amount of time on the days before human beings show up, and then you can have a biblical chronology from that point on. So you could have Adam and Eve maybe living 6,000 years ago, but that doesn't mean that the world is 6,000 years old, or the stars or anything else, although then you got to deal with day 4, the stars and the sun and the moon being made after the plants. And yeah, you see, you got what are called in the logic is internal contradictions that naturally lead to a problem. It is true that there was no consensus idea that the Earth could only be 6,000 years old up until and no consensus now. But the point is that specific version tied to flood geology, that notion dates to the early 20th century with Ellen White and the Seventh-day Adventists, who she had a revelation. An angel came down to her and actually showed her the flood in like a big cinemascope version that she watched from her chair. And absolutely, it must be true. And she, the Seventh-day Adventists, by the way, drew on a demographic that included the old Millerites, who had expected the world to end in the 1840s. And so there's a pedigree behind all of this. This was basically upstate New York nutballery. that spread around and metastasized. And this view percolated around in early 20th century creationism, George McCready Price and others, and there were a relatively small number, I mean, really small number, like 4 or 5 primary pushers of these notions. And some of the people they converted along the way were like Henry Morris and John Wickham, who then dusted off, got rid of all the Adventism stuff, made it more Baptisty, and turned that into creation science in the 1960s. And that is where things were picking up. The first stage of modern creationism. Remember, I've lived through all of this, so I am older than modern young Earth creationism as a political system. Not much older, but still. That continued on until for about the first 20 years then, they got stronger and stronger and bigger in very conservative religious communities. And by the mid-70s and into the 80s, we're actively trying to push their versions of things into the public schools. That's when it hit the Supreme Court and the early Edwards v. Aguilar and all those rulings. That's when they kind of...
Yeah, Louisiana,
yeah. That is, don't you feel proud that your state has such a history there?
I'm not sure proud is exactly the word I would use, but I feel something in my bowels.
Yeah. And technically, I don't think they've ever repealed the various pro-intelligent designy education things that were done under the Jindal years. They're still stuck with that. And it's made you the state you are today. Anyway.
Yay, go us.
So in the period then after that retread, that's when Pandas and People was formulated as an attempt to have a squishy version of creationism as a creationism textbook. And this is when the design movement popped up. Philip Jeanson in particular acted as the catalyst there, where they thought they could have anti-evolutionism and not really bother about that chronology thing. So they didn't have to worry about that. And this is a diagnostic. Jackson, you've plowed through Darwin's Doubt. You will have observed that at no point does Mayr think chronologically.
No, his book is a very bad exegesis of Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould, although minus the wonderful writing.
Yes, and minus a lot of the other material.
Minus being actually good and factual, yes.
Right. And this is, in fact, a diagnostic feature of intelligent design. Whereas young Earth creationists bite the bullet and try to concoct a preposterous, impossible chronology that they will never be able to cram all the data field in. The intelligent design movement just ignores it. So they can accept geological ages, they can accept the age of the Earth, no problem, but nothing makes any sense. When Behe was on Dan Stern Cardinale's show, chronology was never coming up in the discussion. I have never seen chronology ever come up in his treatments of any of his material, in any of his books. And it's true of Steve Mayr, it's true of Berlinski, it's true of Dembski, that they live in a fog bank where, yes, there was a past, and about the only number that ever comes up is the Cambrian explosion 500 million years ago. But
yeah,
at no point are they thinking, well, what happened just before that? And what happened right after that? And what happened after that? And what happened after that? And let's try to apply our design model. So that's why I have my killer question Riley says Louisiana is a pretty bad history, even outside of the creationism. Yeah, long comes from... It has a long and checkered political past.
Hey, Huey Long was the best thing that ever happened to 1940s Louisiana. What are you talking about?
At least so the logic goes. Anyway,
hey, Highway 1 wouldn't exist without Huey Long. I'll have you know.
Right. Well, and as good demagogues go, he made a point of giving people populist stuff that made their lives better. It was in this.
RJ, the railways ran on time. Don't you know that?
Yes, yeah. That's the old saw about Mussolini, although technically some have pointed out that only the international main lines ran on time during the Mussolini years. The locals were just as bad as before and after. And so that's more of the bullshitting. that
Yeah.
totalitarian regimes come through. So,
He was gonna run for president, crazy enough, and then he got assassinated.
And All the King's Men, which is a loosely done spectacular biography of him, played by Broderick Crawford from I think the late 1940s. That if you haven't seen All the King's Men, you should, because it's a stunning motion picture. Also, a powerful evocation of that kind of pre-Trumpian style of populism. That populist style, as all this is also the case of grafter regimes. Grafter regimes are never so stupid as to not do things for their constituents. They're ripping you blind and sucking money into their coffers, but they don't hoard it. They give some of it out, and they want to be ostentatiously seen, building roads and making hospitals and making life better for people, because that's how they sustain the thing. Tammany Hall used to do that. That was the whole reason why a lot of old-style Democratic Party stuff, Pendergrass regime that Harry Truman came out of in Missouri, these are all regimes that knew on which side to butter their bread while doing the graft. And the stupidity is anybody who is such a grifter that he doesn't actually get stuff done for his constituents. I mean, even Trump got some judges in there who made a point of giving you something. He would never do anything that didn't support his own personal finances along the way. And unlike Huey Long, who didn't own a hotel or a golf course, President Trump has a new dynamic of this. And in many respects, Huey Long was less he had a fiery nature to him, but he was a calmer person, frankly, than Trump. Trump's narcissism is in a very different ballpark in there. So those of you who want to have a little history of things, you can check out. And I know PBS has done biographies of Huey Long, and there's a ton of writing on the subject. But it's certainly there was a chicken in every pot. That was the tagline of Herbert Hoover. That there was a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot.
Huey Long was every man a king.
And hence the phrase "all the king's men," which is a neat thing, and Humpty Dumpty and all the other stuff. It's unknown, given the circumstances of the time, just how much of a political career Huey Long would have continued to have into the 50s and 60s had he been.
I doubt he would have. I doubt he would have beat FDR, but he still would have had a pretty good run in Louisiana.
He would have had a natural following. FDR. I studied an awful lot about that in the historical period, and when I was in college, and Roosevelt was virtually unparalleled in his skill in rhetoric and speechifying. One of the ones that we studied in depth in one course was Wendell Willkie, who ran against him in 1940. And did not too badly against him. He didn't get mauled the way poor Alf Landon did in 1936, and it was just vaporized. That was where the old line came up that as Maine goes, so goes the nation. Well, in 1936, as Maine goes, so goes Vermont, and that was about the gist of it. That Landon just lost in a catastrophe in 36. But anyway, Willkie was a liberal Republican who was a reformist against crime. He was breaking up criminal organizations and all that. And he had an interesting character. He was a fascinating character, and he was a good speechifier. He had a good man of the people quality about him. But if you compare the best Willkie speech with even the most mediocre FDR speech, FDR is just running on such a level of precision in how he turns phrases and exploits weaknesses in things. There was a thing about some of the associates, some of the cronies of Willkie. I'm sorry if I'm geeking out here on the history, but maybe people will be kind of interesting on it. I think something like Barton, something, and Smith were some of the associates that were kind of shady, that were in the Republican Party, that were connected with the Willkie run in 1940. And he would highlight these Barton, Houghton, and Smith, in the speech that he would come up with, and he would just be playing the audience beautifully. To some extent, Trump plays off of tropes in much the same way, except it's in a nastier, acid-dipped, stupid mode. And so you have to argue that in many respects, Trump has studied some things, and he has learned how to take advice of things. For example, the whole wall trope was not his idea. It was a word that was brought to him from one of the technical advisors who said, we need something easier to do here. How about the wall? And he went with that.
Because xenophobia is easy to sell. So
yeah. Lisa asks, can we erase Trump like the Egyptians erased Akhenaten? Oh, not for one thing. As a historian, I don't want to erase people. That's the other thing. But I think Trump is going to do a perfectly good job of erasing himself. He's a huckster who is an incompetent businessman who is really good at huckstering through crises. Unfortunately, he spent a lot of time piling up things that he had lawyers and fixers to push away, that didn't go away. And then he was president of the United States for 4 years when he had a compliant Justice Department who could put the lid on stuff and keep all the stuff battened down, keep the tax returns from being released, blah, blah, blah. And that meant the pressure cooker was just heating up. And plus, because he was an incompetent, divisive jerk, it meant that whatever patina his hotels and golf courses and all that had prior to becoming President Doofus, all of that was blown to smithereens, to where there are people who detest him and are reminded of how much they detest him in a way that his former business interests are never going to make it as they did before. And they were hit by COVID restrictions, which was made worse because of his own incompetence. So he's just piled up a mess of things of his own making. And already we discovered that his 757 plane, the Trump plane, is non-flying. One of the engines is taken off. It's mothballed. I don't think he can afford to fly it anymore. Because those are expensive aircraft. Not a 737, but a bloody 757. He went a little too overboard in getting that new style plane. And so when he zipped up to New York recently, he was in a little teeny private Learjet job, not his fabulous old plane, because I don't think he has the money to maintain that again. And he's got close to $890 million that he's got to pay back in the next 3 or 4 years before the 2024 election. And then he's got maybe $1 billion or more of potential liabilities from various lawsuits independent of that. And his resources have dipped down to only about $2 billion currently. And so he has, he will very possibly go the whole Taj Mahal route again. And that includes the fact that he has a whole slew of greedy little kids who are not going to want daddy to squander their inheritance. And Lady Macbeth Melania, who is going to want to get a divorce settlement where she can get some money out of it. There's a lot of vultures ready to pick over the bones, and they may not get any bones to pick. So the next few years are going to be amusing as he attempts to sell trinkets to the Republican Party to keep himself operational. Anyway, hi, Brian. Hi, Vandalia. Jackson and I think had a wonderful time on your show talking about the plants. I think Jackson did a fabulous job. I did a tweet about it earlier today about the choice of imagery and the condensation of all of that stuff made clear a thing that I knew a bit about, but now know better thanks to that. So I can heartily recommend that to everybody. It's a wonderful thing. And subscribe to Mott's channel. He brings some wonderful guests on, and they have wonderful discussions. And the whole purpose of it is to understand a topic so that you come out of it having a clearer sense, to get people on that know about a subject and can explore it and field questions and make it clearer. There's so much stuff on. You go over to Standing for Truth or somewhere where there's a negative effect, where you actually know less after you've watched the show than you did before. No, we don't want to do that. Brian Stevens, we're bringing up Gerald Ford. He was president from after Nixon resigned and was not reelected in 1976. That's when Carter came in. Now, I was in my Reagan Republican phase during that period, and Ford was one of those that was trying to pick up pieces of the mess that Reagan was making. They had let's cut the taxes on the people at the top, and that's going to trickle down to everybody, and it's going to make everything really wonderful. And never mind that it's going to produce deficits. And also, you had a situation for Ford, who had lost out earlier to this period. He was trying to deal with inflation, which was caused by Richard Nixon gumming up the economy way back in the 1970s. So if you think all that history of economy and history of our nation and politics doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect things, bull hockey. That what people do and make bad decisions on things about what tax laws are going to be what environmental regulations are going to be what inheritance laws, various things that go on. This affects not only the immediate period, but can cascade. The Nixon bad economic policies sank both Ford and Carter. Carter couldn't resolve the inflation issue. And now we have some people saying we mustn't have these trillion-dollar infrastructure programs because it will spur inflation. Oh, come now, kids. I've lived through the whole period as to what caused inflationary spirals, and I'm not terribly worried about all this stuff. And none of you who are younger than I am will have ever known what it was like to have an inflationary spiral. All during the periods in the 19 Nixon managed to use wage and price controls. Here's some more history to turn a 4% inflation rate into an 11% inflation rate. It did exactly the opposite of what he wanted it to do, and that produced the term stagflation, which you may not have heard to if you're very young. It's a term that's obsolete now because of what was done by Reagan and Volcker in the 1980s to get rid of inflation, squeeze it out of the system. But it was a thing where in the 70s, there was a certain amount of economic impetus to buying stuff, because if you waited too long, it was going to be even more expensive because of inflation. So you buy a new lawnmower now because it'll be $50 more if you wait another year, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when stuff really cost something. Do you realize that in that era, a VCR cost $1,500 and a pre-recorded video cassette was $135 a pop? That shows you how times have changed. You streaming video, $5 Blu-rays at the bargain bin world, and DVR or Blu-ray players were like $100. No, you're in a different world from what we had. Cars cost $20,000, but then again, if you were to take a modern automobile and stack it up to what inflation-adjusted money would have bought you, they would have dropped their mouth. My God, this thing, it's got automatic air conditioning and power windows and satellite communication and computer interfaces for portable telephones. Holy moly! That's not what you were getting for the equivalent of $20,000 car in 1975. You know, you'd be lucky if you had a heater. You would be talking about a car that would have sold for about $5,000 in those days. And if you go farther back in time, that $20,000 car back in the 1920s, adjusted for inflation, was about $200 or $300 into the $500 range, which could have got you either a Model T or a Chevy. And you wouldn't have a heater, and there would be no radio, and there would be no carpeting, and you'd have roll-down windows, and you didn't have a trunk, and and the gasoline, which was like 20 cents a gallon in those days, but that's the equivalent of $4 a gallon now. So when people try to look at how things have changed, you have to first recognize things have changed and understand why that's the case. And it's my job as annoying old fart who has a history degree and studies these things in detail to remind you of how we came to be where we are. And although there are difficulties that we face, holy moly, do we have opportunities that we didn't have. I mean, my gosh, we can carry around the entire world in an electronic access device. that would have been the miracle of all times if you had trotted one of these things out in 1980.
RJ, I want to point out. Okay, Titan, Uranus, your jokes are very funny. Pat on the back for you.
Yes,
There you
he's
go.
always go. Yes, yes. I could tell a joke about trickle down inflation, but 99% of you wouldn't get it. Oh my. There we go. Well, yeah. It produced an awful lot of humor and all of that, and there are, unless you deal with old baby boomer types like us, um, not you, me, that you would not have any direct visceral impression of what that was. Your life is the
Yeah.
window that you were starting to notice around the time you were going into kindergarten.
Yeah, RJ, I'm the baby of the baby of the baby boomers.
Yeah. And so the world you face and the experiences that you have, the expectations that you have about what is in the future are different from what I would be expecting. And that's why I'm always reminding people of what we're doing. I'm doing a YouTube. Somebody in Louisiana live electronically on my laptop computer, which is a portable computer that I can carry around with me. And I'm doing this for no cost. This is free. I mean, this is absolutely astonishing.
It's free real estate.
Yeah. And this is something that occasionally it glitches up, the connection screws up. That I have to reset my computer because it's having troubles communicating between the word processor and the printer every once in a while, and so I have to restart. Oh, poor little baby has to restart his computer so that his portable printing device can activate. You realize what a miracle all that is, to be able to process and access information so effortlessly. Where how many people have had to go to a library to photocopy something?
Yeah.
That was commonplace in my world in the 1970s and 80s. And I had to go to the university library to get information, and I would have to physically hard copy at 5 or 10 cents a pop, page after page to get some. That adds up. Whereas, you just download a PDF, print out whatever things you want on your portable printing machine. Holy smokes. So there is no, given all of these resources, if we get back to the essence of what it means with the Tortugan and the Troubles in Paradise Project and all the stuff that we've been doing, nobody in the 21st century has an excuse for stupid. We have too many tools at our disposal. Too much information is available. Too many ways we can easily fact check stuff and download the primary source information. Nobody has an excuse for being a Matt Powell or a Nephilim Free or an Otangelo. No, sorry, I'm not going to cut it.
And yet here we are.
And yet here we are. There are, because they have bad methods, Riley Lewis said, yes, but think about how much easier the 1970s were compared to the 1920s or 1800s. That's a legitimate thing to point out. I'll tell you one thing about that. Here's some more history. Part of it has to do with the anxiety about how things change. And functionally speaking, we all live in a world that pretty much has been fixed by 1920. That by 1920, you have a world in which there are airplanes, motion pictures, telephones, record players, gas warfare, submarine boats, airships, people thinking about flying to the moon, that quantum theory, Einstein's relativity, modern art, jazz, virtually all of the world we're used to now. We've become more sophisticated. Our planes are faster. Our automobiles are more sophisticated. We have portable computers, blah, blah, blah. But the structural aesthetics of that 1920 world were like another planet compared to 1870, where you lived almost your entire life, unless you were very rich, within 100 miles of where you were. You would have married somebody that you bumped into within that 100-mile radius or less. You had a low lifespan. You would have never heard vast amounts of music because none of it was played where you were, and you had no way of hearing it otherwise. You had no way of, unless you were a musician who subscribed to a thing that got sheet music so you could study the score and play it on your piano. How would you know even what a Schubert sonata was, let alone what a Mahler symphony was, that you would have had no way of hearing? Whereas behind me, on my shelves are my CD collection that I functionally have the last 200 years of music at my fingertips. Boop, pull them out, listen to whenever I want. In a way that I would have been an emperor, not even an emperor in 1800 could have had such access to that kind of information as quickly. And so we live in an entirely different world of an understanding. The 1920s world had a more clear understanding of the physical universe, not complete, but than somebody in 1870 did. And all of the social norms, the difference between rich and poor, that was blown to smithereens by World War I. That was the big game changer there, where the difference between what a poor working class person lived and what an upper class person did, whether they were an aristocrat or a millionaire that made money off of making widgets, it didn't matter. That divergence of lifestyle grew way less after World War I, to where what you ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in 1920 was much more similar between the classes. And we've just accelerated that process to where within my lifetime, it's gone from a place where no grocery store would have had a varietal wine section and ethnic food to where virtually all grocery stores do now, to where the wine department, which one do I fit? Wow, they've got this Italian varietal here from the Casino de What's on sale for $12.95. Yeah, I think I'll try that one. No, that was unthinkable in the world when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s. My mother, here's another creepy thing, can remember how when you bought a loaf of lettuce.
That may have been a phrasing issue, RJ. You said my mother. Let me tell you another creepy thing.
Yes, let's put that's a clause with some semicolons in there. Yeah. My mom told me about a thing that I had no personal experience with. When you go into a grocery store and buy a head of lettuce, you would not have to make a point of washing it off to make sure there were no bugs in it. That was commonplace for her world before the 1950s. It was non-existent in the world that I was growing up with in the 50s and 60s on, and would get you a health inspector and a spot on the evening news, like trip tails in the cereal, if that were to occur anywhere. That's how used to absolutely immaculately clean food we are at all levels of things. And that didn't come about by magic. It came about by legislation and reforms and inspectors and funding inspectors.
It came about largely by Theodore Roosevelt reading The Jungle by Upton Sinclair.
Among other things. And an awful lot of activists over the years who scream bloody murder about stuff and start putting in reforms. And that's why we're overdue for an awful lot of reforms on an awful lot of areas. And hopefully the current administration has got some interesting things in line that we're going to be seeing what life is going to be like. And of course,
well, did you see what dropped today?
Oh, the infrastructure plan.
Have you read about it?
Just a bits on the thing. Of course, McConnell in the Senate is screaming bloody murder that they're going to raise taxes on people at the top. Yeah. Yeah, and they're going to adjust even Wall Street is not all that sad at the prospect of the corporate income tax ratcheting up a bit. It's not the big deal that it was before. And the fact that the stock market is still, running into the 33,000. We'll see as these policies get instituted. There's a downside politically. You're a political alert for the GOP Trumpist GQP party to stonewall on this, because it means that if they're passed, because they know how Congress works, they can pass them on a reconciliation bill with only 50-some% of the votes, and they have Vice President Kamala Harris in there to vote the deciding vote, so they can squeak these things through. And they say, "Well, we don't have any Republican votes for them." If they have a good policy and it has good effects, you can't take any credit for it because you voted against it. You were steadfastly screaming bloody murder. I mean, this was going to be terrible.
It's kind of infuriating to hear that, like, oh, look at all the good we're about to do for infrastructure, to be met with, but you're going to raise taxes on the rich. Who cares? Who cares?
And exactly. And this is the thing this has been the two areas that have been diddled for as long as I've been around are infrastructure suggestions. Many presidents have tried to tackle it and hit buzzsaws, partly because they didn't have enough money to do it, because of the tax cuts that meant that the government didn't have enough free and money to go around, although the Defense Department always gets it. You know, we were spending $700 billion a year on the Defense Department now. Do we really feel that much safer? Anyway, and the other is the space program, which had been nickel and dime to death and all that. Now we have a little more dynamic period because you've got SpaceX and others blowing up their units on the launch pad.
Well,
and
in fairness, we did land the rover.
Yeah. Oh, I am gobsmacked by those pictures from Mars that keep coming in. They're starting to unfold a little a flyer that they're going to be launching. This is a wonderful time for science to get in, and we need more of that. But on the infrastructure front, there's so many things that need to be changed with high-speed internet, with transportation systems, with energy. And it's been diddled and diddled and diddled for decades, and it's only gotten worse, and it needs to be done now. We can easily see circumstances for all of those out there that are just horrified at the prospect that the fossil fuel cars' days are numbered. Get a grip. Do you have any idea how wonderful these new technologies are? That I just have a measly little non-plug-in hybrid, and I wouldn't go back to the old ways for anything. And you're going to have a system as time shifts forward to where high-speed battery charging and all of the new technologies are in place, and an infrastructure will be built up. We're not used to getting our gas where we park at the grocery store, but that's what you can do with plug-in units at grocery stores in the future. But when you stop your car, you just plug it in and recharge while you're going and doing something else, in addition to plugging and recharging at your place of work, or at every motel and hotel will have recharging stations built into their parking lots, and this will just be infrastructure. So there's umpteen different places that you'll be doing this, and even there will be recharging stations at the gas station, where a few people with vintage cars that have special permits will still be buying gas, probably for $8 to $12 a gallon, but nonetheless, by then. But most of the stuff they sell at gas stations are what they're doing now, which is sushi and snacks and go to the bathroom and pick up a hamburger and buy a movie and all the other stuff. They're basically mobile grocery store stops that service the people that drive long distances. I already know that because I've taken enough trips now in the recent times to realize that most of the times we're stopping on the road is not to get gas, as it was in the old days, in the old gas guzzler era. It's to get, pick up some licorice, or let's stop at that place and have a piece of pie or an ice cream soda or something. Not to get gas, because the gas mileage is so powerful in the car that eventually you go, yeah, we'll pick up some gas too, top off the tank, and then we go on way off.
Yeah.
And it changes the dynamic. And people who are fuddy-duddies, my late brother-in-law was a fuddy-duddy. He grew up in a time when you had to roll the windows down to get air into the car. This was a pre-air conditioning person. And air conditioning wastes energy. It uses fuel. And he moved finally to the era of modern aerodynamic cars, where it's not good for its gas mileage to roll the damn window down. Now it's ruining the air circulation around there. You're supposed to use the damn air conditioner. That's what it's for. The car's engineered for it. And he couldn't get that into his head because he came from an environment in the 20s, 30s, 40s that those things were not the way cars run. We also, another thing to show you, walk down memory lane. Be gobsmacked at the performance level of modern automobiles. The entire automobile industry has BMWized. And this was taking place really in the 1980s, 90s, and into the 21st century, where all cars nowadays have bucket seats, center consoles, sports suspension, sports steering, can go 0 to 60, even if you're a mom and pop car, you can go 0 to 60 in 9 or 10 seconds without even batting an eyelash. Do you realize how slow that sounds compared to performance cars today, but how fast that sounds compared to what cars were in the 1970s and 60s and 50s?
Yeah.
That minivan or my little Honda Civic can do 0 to 50 60 in 10.5 seconds. The 1958 V8 Corvette could go 0 to 60 in, hold your horses, 12.4 seconds. Slower than my Honda. And that was considered a racy car. Now, when you look at real performance cars, which often are like a BMW electric, you have 0 to 60 times in like 2.5 or 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's how the technology has changed. And even the ones with gasoline engines have better gas mileage than even compact cars did in the 1970s.
Yeah.
All of the things have changed dramatically. So the idea that some fuddy-duddy is going to say, well, all these new electric cars and all of that, no. Oh, brother, have you driven a modern car lately? You really need to get up to speed about how the technologies have changed and how our standards have changed.
Fairness to the electric car person, or to the anti-electric car person, electric cars are not the future. The future is going to be the corn oil and that kind of stuff. Organic,
or
stuff.
Hydrogen fuel cells. There's various ways. Although remember, that those aren't fuel sources; they're only fuel storage capacity. That it takes a little more energy to make the energy for the fuel cell than otherwise. But it depends on where you're getting your energy from. Now, if you're getting it from a coal-fired plant, it's not helping. If you're getting it from a wind turbine or solar or hydroelectric, that's a different kettle of fish. And so we're dealing with it. And also the idea
we would need to expand our renewable sources of fuel as well.
Yeah, and we will be doing so. The technologies and the advancements that are going on to create a modern 21st century power grid. One of the things that we can see an example of a bad grid is India. India wastes something like a third to a half of its energy just from how incredibly inefficient its electric grid is. It's all jiggery-pokery, and people are stealing things and putting extension cords up to the power things and trying to get what they can on it. And that's why they've had to build so many damn coal-fired plants for their industrial thing. Remember, India is a nation in transition. It's got over 1 billion people, most of whom are living in poverty. But do you know how many people in India today live in a middle-class lifestyle that if you took a picture of their house, you would think you were in Southern California? You know how many people there are in India that live that way?
How many?
350 million.
That's a few people. Yeah.
That's as much as the entire population of the United States living a middle-class lifestyle in India today. Now, they've got even more poor people and castes and other things that need it. But you think the rest of those people are going to want to sit tight and enjoy their poverty and not share in the new ways of doing things? No. So all of that is going to be changing. And I'm enough to know how clever human beings can be if we use science and reason and smarts, and how dangerous it can be if we have stupid people running things. And we've already seen a 4-year period of stupid people, and we don't want to do that again.
That's true. Yeah, I would not like to live through that again. Yes.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale. This is what happens when Tortukans, that word I typed in earlier, when Tortukans get in political charge, that's exactly what we have happen. And Paul Ryan is a I always get him and Ron Paul, and there's too many ones with similar names. Anyway, the idiot that's been going after Fauci, the senator along with McConnell from Kentucky. Kentucky is not well served by their 2 Republican senators.
Well, it's also the state home of Answers and Genesis, so you know.
Yeah. There we go. Yes. Yeah. So this is an exciting time. For one thing, a diversified energy grid, a cogeneration grid. Texas has just demonstrated how the market-driven dog-eat-dog approach to a power grid was not a good idea. That the only parts of Texas that didn't go dark during their mess were the ones that were in the states that were the sections of the counties that were part of the national power grid that was regulated. That should be telling you something right there. So the idea, the old bit of where Ronald Reagan's old saw that government isn't the solution, it's the problem. That, that's a cliche. We should retire it, along with why are there still monkeys? That ties us around.
Indeed.
Yeah. Anyway, this will be we're well past the hour on there. I didn't see any particular questions on things other than the general comments that we've commented on. Do you have any final comments before I shut down the stream?
I don't think so.
Okay, so everybody stay safe. There are some states that are doing stupid things. The states that are not doing stupid things are operating pretty smoothly. Washington State in here, you know, we wear masks when we go out. We've got commerce and stuff going on reasonably, so that things aren't grinding to a halt. But nitwits that go out and party like there's no tomorrow in things, that's going to produce more surges. And I'd like that we could be able to be surpassed by, say, Brazil, which is hot on our tails to be the ones with the most deaths. But is this a competition we want to? There's no winning or losing on this. We have too many people.
Yep.
Yeah. Riley, don't they also have the Creation Museum in Kentucky? Yes, and
Yep.
the Ark Encounter, where you get to see all the reasons why Noah's Ark doesn't make sense. But it's right pretty. It's got a pretty interior. The late Cy Strike went a tour through there, and I did some color commentary on it. We referenced it in The Rocks Were There. Shameless plug. We need to put in shameless plug. Let's put our advertisement up for the book before we end here. Yep, I keep on forgetting that. But our dear friend Peter put a big lot of effort into that and did a beautiful job. Let me share screen and come on. Why am I not in see what I want to see here? There we go. Got to have in a window format. There we go. And we'll get ourselves going here. This is the shameless plug for our wee little book. As you can see, the image of it is not an exaggeration. That's actually how thick it is. It has many thousands of sources, beautifully documented, has an index. Hear that, Nathaniel Jeanson? Indexes are a thing you can do. And we will be working on the second volume, which might get it out by Christmas, but probably it'll be 2022 on that one. And because it's an awful lot of stuff to do, and we want it to be as good as the first volume. But at any rate, it's kept us certainly busy, and all came about because good old Jackson,
Yes.
at one point, just said to me ever so casually, "Hey, would you like to do a book together on the Answers in Genesis books?" And I think I took all of about 1/4 of a microsecond to agree. And I have not regretted it at all since. It's been a delightful process, as all book writing is. It's also educational for the writer. That if you ever write a book in which you learn nothing in the process of writing the book, it's always educational. So there we got our shameless plugs in. We had a functioning thing where I was able to see the people on the screens, and I think we all had a good time in discussing stuff and a tiny bit of politics, but heck, what the hell. I'm looking forward to the rest of the century, and hopefully we won't have an asteroid impact to screw things up. And we'll see you all next week. Stay safe, everybody.